Thank you for coming to my Zoom lecture today. I'm Dr. Kathy Kim, and I'm a body function specialist. In my functional medicine practice, I address metabolic and structural imbalances, and my content often focus on the structural imbalance, but today I wanted to focus more on the inflammatory side of things. I hope you can find some new information that you have not thought about before regarding this topic. I did a search on Amazon, as most of us would do, to look for resources. And when you do a search for anti-inflammatory diet on Amazon, just recently I got over 4,000 results for books on this topic. Obviously, there is no scarcity in information on this topic of anti-inflammatory diet. And what possibly could I find helpful to you beyond these 4,000 results on Amazon? Obviously, this time of inflammation is on everybody's mind because of COVID-19. This is a great illustration from a New England Journal of Medicine article that shows this red bar, which is the amount of inflammation going on in the disease process, correlating to the severity of the illness. So when people are asymptomatic mild, up in the first two columns, they have very little inflammation going on. And as they get to be moderate to severe, then they have a lot more inflammation. This is an article from way before COVID-19 was on our minds. This is originally from June of 2014, then updated this in November 2018. And it's talking about anti-inflammatory foods. What does an anti-inflammatory diet do? The immune system, it says, becomes activated when your body recognizes anything that is foreign. And it lists these things, and it lists what happens to you when you are inflamed day in and day out. And this is linked to a lot of chronic diseases. They packaged it again for August 2020. So that's 2014, 18, and now 2020, the same exact information. Obviously, it's needed out there for people to understand what foods they can do to fight inflammation. I found in my work with patients that it might be that maybe what to do is not so much the information hurdle out there. It's maybe whether or not it applies to you. Obviously, there's so much out there about it. What if there is so much out there about it, but if you don't believe it applies to you, then you might not take that information in. And I thought that the stumbling hurdle might be for people. What is inflammation? What does it mean to them? And are they even susceptible to it themselves? If they don't feel susceptible, then they're not going to be receptive to the information. I like this slide because I thought it shows really well how most of us out there are thinking about what inflammation is. So this is a model of the skin on the surface. I circled injury infection, and so that's the damage to this perfect skin. It gets a red bump. It's warm, red, and swollen. This is our traditional view of what inflammation is. And then over here, finally, in this other oval, the skin is healing. We know what that looks like on the outside. This diagram shows what is going on the inside, under the skin, that you can't see, at the level of all this molecular biology, all the stuff that is making it possible for that red, swollen, inflamed area on the surface to heal. This under the surface part in this diagram is what they're talking about why we're inflamed. And so this is what I would seek to explain in this lecture. Inflammation is a response to injury. It's meant to be a temporary way to cope with things when we are injured, and we hijack or we kind of change our processes just temporarily so that we can get back on our feet. Like what happens after a flood or a hurricane or a tornado. You can cope with businesses being closed and no electricity. You cope with those things, but you expect everything to return to normal. So if inflammation is a response to injury and you don't feel that you're being injured, maybe what we should look at is what could be injuring you or us. This is an impressive slide, impressive to patients when I show them this information about the cancer in general, which is also an inflammatory condition, but the cause of cancer, because most of us believe that cancer runs in your family, which it does when we see that anecdotally from friends and family. But only 5 to 10% of those are purely genetic. The other 90 to 95% are caused by environment and lifestyle factors. Underneath this group, then 30 to 35% of that is dietary. When you look at this list, the two areas you could do something about, that you most could take action on, would be under tobacco and the dietary. Hence now this term called the exposome. This was coined in about 2005. It was a take on the word chromosome. So this is exposome, the combination of these external environmental factors, including diet, that are affecting your gene expression in your chromosomes. So it's affecting your gene expression. And then this ultimately impacts your health. So they have lists of the specific external environment in the circle above here. In the bottom level is general external environment. Of course, I'm focusing on diet today. I thought it was kind of helpful to break those two circles down into lists. It's a little easier to see those. And I put under general specific on the right here, we're going to look at diet. As an aside, I thought it's important to note that under consumer products, a lot of the things that we're consuming are actually packaged. And these consumer products, they're talking about packaging like health and beauty aids and the packaging. But under diet, we also are packaged, having packaged things in plastic water bottles. Food is packaged in plastic, and these chemicals are leaching into our diet. But I'm mostly focusing on what's just purely in our food. I thought it was helpful to talk about diet like as if it were medicine. So when I prescribe a medicine, I prescribe the dosage, the frequency, the strength of the medicine. And then there's this fourth component, the toxin additives, the non-food aspects of diet that are really in our food. And to be honest, they're in our medicines also. Many of these medicines have additives to make them bind together. And these are inflammatory actually. And same for the coloring that they use to make them attractive and to sell better. Okay, so we'll focus on dosage first. The concept in dosage, I thought that patients might not understand well, is that they believe that everything they're taking is in moderation. And that is true. I do believe they're practicing that, or we all try to practice that. But I think our concept of moderation has been changing rapidly in modern times. I use this glass of orange juice to represent that the glass size for orange juice has steadily increased from the days of your grandmother or great grandmother. The days of using elbow grease to juice an orange with the home setup are over. Machines can do this very well. And since the ease of obtaining large amounts of orange juice has increased, then of course it's easier to pour more and buy it in larger quantities, and the containers have gotten bigger. It takes 3 medium-sized oranges to make 8 ounces of orange juice. But I would say most people's serving of orange juice is a lot more than 8 ounces. And when you're going to have 8 ounces of juice or more with a sandwich, it's probably difficult to eat 3 oranges, 3 apples, or in this case, because these are the containers that are the larger containers at the Subway, these probably represent about 5 oranges and 5 apples. So it would be really hard to eat 5 oranges or 5 apples with your sandwich, but it's much easier to drink just the pure juice without the fiber and all the other nutritious parts of the fruit. This lemonade is probably at least 20 ounces, and it is not made out of only lemons. It is made out of cane sugar. But the point is that when all of these carbohydrates meant to be consumed kind of sort of distributed within the fiber of the fruit is delivered all at once, this is an injury to the body, because it's a stress to the body to handle that load all at once. A little bit like what happens when we have too much rain, or you try to water a garden with soil that's really tough, you can put a bunch of water on it, but it's really the soil can only absorb so much at once. And then there are problems when you have way too much water that you can't handle, for instance. So going along the lines of moderation and the idea that is changing, the size has changed now of things like artificial, which was never really natural, of course, to begin with. And so it goes from a 12-ounce can. Now we have a standard 20-ounce bottle. This is pretty standard for what people think is a serving size. So 12 ounces is already a hefty load of carbohydrates at once, and now 20 ounces is going to be that much more. These pictures illustrate kind of where we've come from in terms of the problem of moderation. These are just examples of what they look like thousands of years ago, before these were domesticated and altered by our own ingenuity. This watermelon, which was full of seeds and not very much fruit, and then of course compared to our modern watermelon, and that's true for the banana. It's true for the eggplant, this shocking difference between the original carrot and this juicy sweet carrot we have, and the same for the corn and modern corn. These carrots and corn are much more loaded with carbohydrates than their ancestors. And carrots are one of the sweetest vegetables to consume, even though even though it is good to have as a vegetable. I use a lot of sources from the internet. It's easy to pick up from the internet, because I want you, the viewer, patients, to be able to find this information on your own and not feel like you can't find it yourself to research it or help your own understanding. Dr. Mark Hyman, he is very visible on Facebook and Instagram. He is the director of functional medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, where people are coming from all over who have failed conventional medicine and are being given this information about metabolic inflammation and about how to make the choices, affect the diet that affects their health. And so this information is being presented there, and he's popularizing it, putting out this information to us. And I'm here helping you understand why it could be relevant to you. In this one post, he's commenting about a 20-ounce, this HFCS means high fructose corn syrup. So this 120-ounce soda in a bottle has the equivalent of 17 teaspoons of sugar. And in our ancient ancestry, we only consume 20 teaspoons in a year. I think I made my point about how the dosage has changed over time. How about the looking at the frequency, how this has changed over time? I would say now that no limits exist. Before, we were waiting for seasons and we kind of had to wait, but now you can fly everything everywhere. And even though we're trying to pay attention to the carbon footprint of fruit shipped from Peru, we still like what we like. In this picture of the grocery store, this is of course, all these little Debbie treats. I grew up on these. They're all just different forms of the same processed carbohydrate formula of a refined grain mixed with some sugar source, something to bind them together, and then different seasonings. And this high fructose corn syrup over here in liquid form. This is to demonstrate that you could really eat a whole day of this food: cereal, pasta or sandwich, pizza. I should have said cereal or bagel. You could have a whole day of these foods and think that you had some diversity. But when you break it down by what it came from, they're really all just sources of processed grain, and very little of the actual fiber and the nutrition of the fruits and vegetables, the produce that we need. I explain to patients that this is kind of like eating Play-Doh. Our food, modern food, is a lot like Play-Doh, where you take the same Play-Doh and you press it into all these forms, and you can set the table in your little dollhouse with bananas and grapes and hot dogs, and they're really all the same food, just pressed into different shapes and textures. Let's address the potency factor now of things in our diet. This one is about how we can see the ingredient list, and these are look all natural, but is the quantity actually natural for us? This is partly dosage also, because obviously I was saying that when we drink orange juice, we're drinking the juice of many oranges. When you're having all of those choices, the frequency, you're having all that, the carbs at different times of the day, and it seems like choices. This potency will address slightly a different area, which is about things you normally would not eat in great quantity at all. This one is about carrageenan, which is a natural ingredient. It naturally occurs in red seaweed. You might recognize this from some seaweed salad in a Japanese restaurant, for instance. They found that when it's extracted, though, and added to foods like yogurt, ice cream, pudding, you could get a really nice, great texture out of it. The problem is that the amount that you need to get that texture turns out to be bad for us. It's been associated with getting cancer and stomach problems. This Dr. Tobachman has published many articles about finding that it's in processed food causing inflammation, that of course is related to these chronic diseases. And it's actually so reliable to cause inflammation that she writes that researchers use it to make inflammation happen so they can test their anti-inflammatory drug. It even will cause, not, we don't have to just focus on cancer. The apparently mice exposed to this low concentration of carrageenan just for 18 days develop profound glucose intolerance and impaired insulin action, which of course means that they're headed towards diabetes after 18 days of exposure to this carrageenan. What else are we getting in unnatural quantities? This is another post by Dr. Hyman about gluten. Apparently, there are a lot of us out there who are genetically unable to process gluten very well. But you take that with the problem that now we've engineered wheat to have much more gluten than even the regular original forms of the wheat that they're having maybe domesticated in Europe. This is called, he's calling this super gluten. And this gives the bread even a lighter, fluffier texture that we all love and adore. And he says now it's infected nearly all the wheat in America. Okay, so high fructose corn syrup is also something that you would think is natural because it comes from corn and it's fructose, which is also natural. But it's not natural in its concentrated form. And interestingly, when I looked up about high fructose corn syrup, I had always thought that it came from corn that was squeezed, a little bit like making orange juice. I thought that it was made out of corn squeezed, and you kind of dehydrate it the way you do maple syrup to get it dense and sugary. It turns out that it's made out of cornstarch that they add chemicals to reconstitute, break bonds, and make it into the syrup that they use now to add to syrup, drinks, food, baked goods. Apparently, it contains a lot of mercury. So this FDA researcher requested a barrel of this, and she ran it through the chemical analyzer, and it had toxic levels of mercury because of the manufacturing. And it had these other chemical peaks that she couldn't identify what those were. Moving on to other non-food items that would affect us in our diet that could cause us injury, non-food toxin additives. This was an impressive post. This came a few months ago, that glyphosate, which you might know as Roundup. I've seen commercials about, do you want to participate in a class action lawsuit about Roundup if you've used it as weed killer? The problem is all of us would have to jump on that lawsuit because it is used all over the world for these food crops, especially on our grains, wheat, corn, and soybeans, which is used as the feed for the animals. You can tell where I'm going with that is that now it's in the feed, it goes, the animal eats it, now it's in their flesh, and then you're eating glyphosate when you eat meat that's been fed these crops. It's amazing that a bowl of Cheerios has more Roundup per serving than vitamins D or B12. And that is an impressive comparison that brings it to the forefront of why why we are all getting injured by these non-food additives in our diet, toxins and additives. He makes another post about the top 10 foods with the most pesticides. I find it helpful. I suggest to patients that they make a list of this because it's really hard to commit to memory. When you're faced with a special at the grocery store, it's really hard to remember what was on that list. Here's a picture of when you would be in a produce section of the store and you're overwhelmed with how pretty and natural everything is. But now you have to temper that with the knowledge that there is a concept of the 10 foods with the most pesticides. There's another list out there called the Dirty Dozen. That Dirty Dozen list changes every year, but not by much. It's mostly the same. And these are the produce items that have the heaviest doses of pesticide applied. And when I say heaviest, I don't mean that they have one. I mean, if you looked at what was on them, they have several pesticides at once. These pesticides, because they're meant to kill the bugs, they have some neurotoxin ability. So if you ingest those and they accumulate in your body, then this might affect your thinking or nerve function, brain or other nerve function. But they also have other properties as well. They can stimulate enzymes for susceptible people. They can stimulate enzymes to make you make fat. And they also can make you more resistant to your insulin, same as that carrageenan. And this is how someone could be be a diabetic and eating salad really diligently, or someone trying to lose weight and eating salad diligently and not finding that they're losing weight because these pesticides would actually be preventing them from losing weight. My experiences in when I take them to the grocery store or shopping are definitely more heightened than yours would be because I see patients who are affected by this. One of my patients had not lost a pound in 13 years of trying. And when I introduced her to these concepts and the idea that it's not her fault if her body's enzymes are provoked into making fat when she eats certain pesticides, she ate clean. And when she ate clean, she lost 35 pounds over a year. But she had limited funds. So whenever her diet would get quote unquote dirty for a short period of time, her weight loss would plateau. Here's another additive toxin that we're exposed to, and these are the artificial colors. The main one I wanted to point out is red dye 40. Although he points out that there are 3,000 food additives on the market, I'm sure I know the name of only a handful. And the average one of us is eating 5 pounds of this additive a year. I explained to patients that these artificial colors are made out of petroleum, which we all understand is what we use to make gasoline and oil. And so it's clearly not a food, it's a fossil fuel but it can be processed into something that we can use to make pills look more attractive, like prescription pills, but it's also in NyQuil and Pepto-Bismol or over-the-counter medicines. I believe it's in Theraflu. Then it's in the red velvet cake and those beautiful frostings that we like to decorate with. Okay, now we can regroup a little. That injury is prompting a crisis repair. And this crisis repair is what inflammation is. What was happening under the surface of the skin of the red inflamed bump. The injury is what's provoking this. Hopefully now you could feel somewhat open to the idea that you might be getting chronically injured by your food, of all things, mostly what's added to the food or how man has changed our food through agriculture and made it sweeter in general, sweeter mostly and bigger. And this chronic injury leads to chronic inflammation. And this chronic inflammation, this chronic 911, we're only going to get through this for a little while. This chronic inflammation is what creates the environment that activates disease. Again, to drive home the idea that it's a response to injury meant to be only temporary.